All right, thank you. And I think I should have used this shorter version of the presentation that would have made your life much, much easier. So, indeed, my name is Sebastian Avarvarei, in IT and security for much more than 20 years. Big fan of learning by doing, big fan of learning from my own mistakes, and of course I had a lot of learning opportunities due to that. But turning negatives into positives. Security is here to help. Something that sounds very straightforward, but it's something that we are still getting the grips with. We keep thinking about security as being a goal in itself. And it's not. Security is about protecting the organization that we're part of. Security is about being part of that organization. It's really a team sport. And there are many reasons for doing security as a team sport. If you don't have any other, take at least this one. As a security manager, you will never, ever have enough resources. Then the next best thing that you can do is find resources in other areas. Work with the other teams so they become part of your extended security family. And any opportunity is great for making friends. Security incidents, actually, is when I make a lot of friends. Because security is not a good time to do the blaming game. Security is a time to make friends, to help others. And in order to get to that point, in order to get to the point where, yes, we are helping, yes, we are supporting the organization, this comes from practice. This comes from developing intentional habits. And I know that we, from the technical side, we look at management, well, you have to be born with something different to think as a manager, to be a good leader, to be a good communicator. Wrong. Trust me, managers that went through a full MBA track and just did managerial things, they look the same as the technical people. They see you guys sitting in front of a computer and hacking and things like, oh, those guys might have been born that way. No, that's something that actually you learned. These are intentional skills and habits that we develop, which brings me to the main inspiration for this talk. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with this book. It's the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. It's a book I used a lot in my work, and I grew in my management path with the principles from this book, and I find them very applicable not only to leadership in general, but to security leadership. And there is a quote in the book: "We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence is not an act, but a habit." And this is where the habits come in the book. These are habits that we have to create, we have to work on. And it's also important that we have to remember that we don't have to invent the wheel. I mean, if you're a technical guy moving into a management track, or you're thinking about doing it, you don't have to do it by yourself. There are books like this, frameworks that you can use. Don't reinvent the wheel. So let's start with what are these habits? The first one, be proactive. This is where it first starts. This is the first step you take. But what does it actually mean to be proactive? Typically, between stimulus and reaction, there is no space. If something happens, you react. That's a reaction. Being proactive means moving away from that. Proactive means taking that time between stimulus to think and to have an intentional response. This is where your freedom to choose actually happens. And it's not something that foreign to us in security, if you think about it. Think about incident simulations. You do those with your companies. You're planning ahead. You are moving away from just reacting to incidents to responding to the incident. And you're even taking the next step in proactivity. You're planning how you're going to respond to an incident. And another form of very useful proactiveness is how you deal with problems, how you deal with issues. A reaction is, I see a problem, let's fix the problem. A proactive approach is, we see a problem, how do we solve the process so we prevent those problems from happening? That is the difference between reaction and response. That's what it means to be proactive. And proactive also means that when something bad happens, we're not looking for people to blame, but we're looking on how can we help. And a concept that Stephen Covey introduces in the book, in the chapter about proactiveness, is the circles. Not the circle of life, but he's talking about two circles. The circle of influence and the circle of concern. Very simple, the circle of concern is all the things that we worry about, all the things that might have an impact on us, but we cannot do anything about them. The circle of influence is where you can actually do something. It's where, if you see problems, this is where you can actually act. And it matters a lot, where do you put your focus? Because if you worry about the things in the circle of concern, you cannot change them, you cannot solve them, and you're just going to consume a lot of time. And actually, your circle of influence, what you can actually do, is going to get smaller because you're worrying about the wrong things. However, if you focus on what can you actually do and do it, this is where you're growing your circle of influence. You're moving ahead in the leadership. You're becoming a more helpful, a more valuable member of your team. The circle of concern is where you have the ifs, the conditionals, well, we would have great security if management would give us more money. The circle of influence is, how about I put a proposal together about how can we improve our security program? It's a verb. We're doing something. And then this takes us to the next habit, which is beginning with the end in mind. And Covey has a nice quote in the book again. All things are created twice. There's a mental, first creation, and then there's the second, physical creation. And I want you to do a quick exercise. Think about it. 3 years from now, you're leaving the job you're in. You have your farewell party, and your colleagues and your managers come to the party, and they hold the speeches, and they say, what a great person you were, how much you helped the company, and they give examples of what did you actually do? Where was that greatness coming from? What were the 3 or 5 or 7 things that you will be remembered for? What would you like those things to be? Those should be your goals. This is what you should work for. Begin with the end in mind. Define where you want to get. And by the way, that exercise is something that you can do from time to time. See, how are you on your path? Have the goals changed? Maybe you find maybe new, but you think about, you define the outcomes before you take any action. You even do things, and I know it sounds boring, you do things like mission statements, like defining visions, making plans, making strategies, because this is what leadership is about. This is actually a higher form of proactiveness. I'm thinking about how the company, how the team, how am I going to look in 3 or 5 years? And This is where we start moving from managing emergencies and actually leading according to a plan. And you'll see later there is actually a difference between being a leader and being a manager. And it sounds very theoretical. Yeah, it's just another of those management talks. No, I've actually used it. And I dare say quite successfully. Let me show an example. And this is a real case. I've used this method. It doesn't matter the details, and I try to blur the part that might refer to the company, but it's nothing really confidential. But it started with, I was in charge of application security. And I wanted to make it a bit more predictable. I wanted to be clearer about what do we want to achieve. So I started by creating an application security vision, which is basically a mission statement. What do we want to be in terms of application security? So came up with this phrase: security is a built-in quality of our applications, of measurable maturity, and so on and so forth. So this is our mission statement. This is what we're driving towards. And then I started working backwards from that. Let's define what are, for this year, based on that vision, what are the 3 main goals we want to hit? And then take it further. Take those 3 goals and start breaking it down into even more specific initiatives that we want to drive, but all part of the same vision. And then take it one step further, and lo and behold, I have the plan for the year. It's as simple as that. And this is something that is proactive. This is something that takes leadership. And you don't even have to be a manager to do things like that. This is something that, as a security professional, you can work with, and you can start proposing, and you can use things like that. By the way, referring to the previous habit, you can grow your circle of influence. And you'll see a lot in this presentation how these habits are supporting each other, how they work together, and you keep growing with them. But of course, when we look ahead, we also have to pay attention at the step in front of us. It's like when running. I do long-distance running. I'm looking at how many more kilometers I have, what's the next city I want to get to, but I also need to pay a bit attention in what I'm stepping into. And I know that with many companies, it feels today that you have 10,000 things coming at you at once. I presume it's pretty much the same with any company. And by the way, if it's not the same in your company, let me know if you have any vacancies. But this is how it feels. And there's a saying, management is doing things right. Leadership is doing the right things. But how do we know what are the right things? And in the book, Stephen Covey gives this example of you're part of a company that marches through the jungle, and the manager makes sure that the machetes are sharp, that they can cut nicely, and everybody's in tip shape. They rotate the people in front who keep cutting, and they're making good progress. That's management. You're making sure that your team cuts through the jungle. But then there's this guy who climbs to a tall tree, looks around. Guys, we're in the wrong jungle. That's the difference between leadership and management. Management is about hacking through the jungle. Leadership is knowing if you're in the right jungle and if you're going into the right direction. And by the way, there is actually a thing called withdrawal syndrome for people who are moving from managing to leading, because managing is very rewarding, is very addictive. You're solving problem, you get that nice, good feeling that you solved the problem in front of you. But when you keep focusing on that, you might lose track of the plan. You might forget, what is your mission statement? Where do you want to be? And another tool that Covey gives in the book is called the time matrix. And trust me, I cannot do justice to the book of how many concepts and tools you have in there, at least. I mean, if you want to be here for the next 3 days, as the presenter was saying earlier, just give me the word. But this is a very useful one. It's about prioritizing. But how do we prioritize? And he makes this simple table where you have on the columns the things which are urgent, not urgent. In the row you have the things that are important, not important. And of course, in the first quadrant, it's urgent and important. Those are the crises, the emergency meetings, the last-minute deadlines. Those are things which are necessary. And then you have the second quadrant, which things that are important, but not really urgent. Then you have the distractions and the time wasters, things that you really shouldn't be worrying that much about. But where do you think, as a leader, that you should be putting your time and your effort? A manager would say Q1, but a leader would focus here, because this is where you're adding value as a leader. You're thinking proactively, you're making plans, you're making sure that you are going through the right jungle. You're making sure that the ladder that the manager is climbing is actually leaning against the right wall. That quadrant is where a leader should be putting most of his time, and get rid as much as possible of all the distractions and time wasters. And for the Q1s, yes, they need to be addressed, time box them, or find somebody that to whom you can delegate those. That's how you get to effectiveness. But speaking of managing time, you have to be aware not just of your time, but also the time of others. And let's take a simple example. So you're a great leader. You keep coming with plans and ideas. And you have an idea, and because you have a team, the team starts working. And then you have another idea. And the team for whom you are an inspiration starts working on that as well. And then you get another idea. And you keep going. Because you have a lot of ideas. But what do you think happens with your team? You have to be mindful of what is possible. And this applies not only to your teams, but this applies just as well to working with the others. Because you're leading a security team. You keep telling other people in the company, you have to do this, you have to do this, Can they actually do it? Do they have the resources to fulfill all those requirements? Yes, which are security requirements, and they are absolutely paramountly important. But can they actually do it? And it's also about being mindful of not starting too many things that you can't finish. Because it's very toxic for the morale of your team to start 50 projects and not taking any of them to completion. You better focus on 2 projects and get them done, because that gives to the team a sense of accomplishment. Having 50 projects going slowly, and every quarterly meeting you come to with the same status. Yeah, it's about the same. Yeah, it's still in progress. That's not going to make management very happy, but more importantly, it's not going to make your team people very happy. And it's also about finding problems. I mean, we work in security. We live for finding problems, finding vulnerabilities, Can you actually fix them? Are you in the position to say, we need to fix them all? If you're not, and if you're at the beginning of your career, probably you're not, then you shouldn't be worried about them. Remember the circle of influence and the circle of concern. Finding 10,000 problems that you cannot fix is pointless. Finding 2 problems that you can fix, it's priceless. And this is what's going to increase your circle of influence. And this is how you eventually get to the point where you can say, yes, I found those 10,000 problems. Dear management, this is the budget that I need to fix those problems. But be mindful, are you at that point or not? Think only about the problems you can actually solve. And then we move to the next habit, the win-win habit. And by the way, this is where we make the transition from the first three habits, which Covey describes as being the personal victories, the personal improvements, to the public victories. And think win-win. And this is about creating win-win agreements and making sure that everybody has a good place. And win-win is not about compromise. There are things that Covey calls the paradigms of human interaction. And there are different types of paradigms. You have the win-lose paradigm, where I need to, in order for me to win, the other guy needs to lose. There is the lose-win paradigm, where, yeah, in order to make that person happy or that team happy, I'm going to lose so they can win. But the one that we want to drive towards is, of course, the win-win. And these paradigms of win, lose, they are driven by two things. It's the balance between courage and consideration. Courage to stand up for what you believe. Courage to say, I want to make this change. And consideration, which is being considerate, what does the other party need? What do they want? And Covey also talks about the abundance mindset. And this is something very important for getting to that win-win situation. Because the abundance mindset is the shift from, well, we don't have enough things, so yeah, I'm going to protect mine, I want to win myself, and that will mean that there's going to be less for the other, to, no, actually we have enough things to do what we need. It's, yeah, focusing on the positive, and it sounds so cliche, focus on what you have. But it's important, because focus on what you have is you working in the circle of influence. Focusing on what you don't have is focusing on the circle of concern. And we want to focus on the circle of influence, and that's why we need that abundance mindset. We need to think about what we have, what can we actually work with. And I'm going to give here an example where I actually used that, because I want to make it clear that these are very practical skills, these are very practical habits. Many years ago, I was working with a colleague who is a brilliant security architect. Unfortunately, customer after customer that he was working with, they were saying, we're so happy for what he did, we never want to work with him again because he's so difficult. And he was about to be fired, and I said to my manager at the time, because I was just starting working on this kind of things and reading the management books, and can I work with him on coaching? And I took the initiative, and I worked with him to understand what is the problem, and helping him to see where the issues are. And we actually managed in about 2-3 months to get to a point where he understood now why was he having those conflicts. And it was a win for him because he kept doing what he wanted to do. And it was a win for the company because they got to keep a very valuable member of the team. And this is also a good point to remember again. There's a difference between reacting and responding. In win-win scenarios, we take the time, and instead of reacting to problems, we're thinking, we're making a response that drives us to having a win-win. And what exactly is winning? It's easy to say, yeah, we want a win-win situation. But in order to be able to get that win-win situation is defining what winning means. And here I just made a very simple example. Let's say you are in the security team and you're working with the development team. Each of you will have slightly different goals. You want the application to be as safe as possible. You want to have the logs that you can feed into your SIEM or analyze during incidents. You want the security requirements to be taken seriously by the team, and you want to stop getting those requests. Oh, we need this deployed in production by tomorrow. Can you approve it, please? The development team will have different definitions of winning, and you have to take the time to actually understand what is their definition of winning. And only once you have those two, then you can come up with an agreement that incorporates and addresses all, or at least most, of the winning criteria for each party. Which, by the way, it's a very good segue to the next habit. Seek first to understand, and then to be understood. And maybe for us in security is one of the most important habits. Because we are so focused on what we are doing. We are so focused on security is important. But remember, security is about helping. Security is about understanding what exactly are you defending. And to be able to understand the other party is, you have to get yourself out of the way. Understanding doesn't mean just understanding the other party from your frame of reference. Understanding is understanding the other party from their own frame of reference. And as I said, think about what it means for them. What is the organization concerned about? What are the issues that threaten the business? Not the technical security threats, but what are the issues that the business is worried about? And again, in the book, you have a lot of techniques about, for example, using what's called empathic listening instead of autobiographical listening. Sorry, still struggling with that word. The difference between the two, the autobiographical listening is when you interpret what you're hearing from the other party through your own experiences. You're putting your own filters, your perceptions, your biases, everything that comes from the other party, it's filtered through that. Empathical listening is you're actually understanding their point of view, their reference point. And this is how you achieve really understanding of the other party. And it's really listening with the intent of understanding, because that's something that we also do very frequently. We listen just to look for arguments to counter. We listen because we want to see how can we dismantle their argument, but that's not really listening, that's just looking for a fight. And after you've done that, after you're sure that you understood the other party, then you can look to explain yourself, to explain your reference, to make sure that the other party can do the same and you help them in getting an understanding of where you're coming from. And there are many tools to do that. Some of them are in the book. And yeah, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. This is, again, something that happens to a lot of people moving from technical fields to management. We're looking to recreate the wheel. No, there are so many frameworks. I'm just giving here 2 examples of how to deal with leadership and how to hire people. There are so many tools and frameworks that can make our life much easier. And then we have the habit number 6, which is Synergize. And I used here the example from the Avengers movie. If you know it, at some point Nick Fury describes the Avengers initiative. The idea was to bring together a group of remarkable people, see if they could become something more. And that's actually exactly what Covey means in the book. Synergy is not the same as compromise. In a compromise, 1 + 1 equals 1.5 at best. Synergy is transitioning from let's compromise to let's come up with something better than what the 2 of us had in mind. And let's do a simple exercise. Look at the picture. think about which animal do you see. Keep that in mind. Now tell me, how many of you have seen a duck? Right? How many of you have seen a rabbit? See, now I have the two positions, the two different views, and I'm wrong. Because those are not the only outcomes. How many people were able to see both animals at will? That's a third way. And this is about understanding the differences. This is where it starts, and synergy is a very strong combination of the previous habits. It's understanding those differences and valuing them. Some things are coming much easier to certain type of people. How do we use those differences in what we do? And again, sounds very theoretical. I've used it. Many years ago, I became the global lead for the application security domain in a large company. The company was coming from a point where every year the central management was coming with a set of targets, and all the teams worldwide have to meet those targets, and everybody didn't like them, and there were endless frustrations and complaints and conflicts in the team. And then I tried something else. How about we work together on defining those objectives? And I know it sounds obvious. All the great things are obvious in hindsight. So I worked with them, and we come up with a set of objectives for that year which were much more ambitious, much better than what was coming from the top. And you know what? They were actually achieved and exceeded because they were the result of working together. And they were the result of seeking to understand. We understood each other. What are your challenges? What are my wishes? Where do we come from? Also, it was part of beginning with the end of mind, but clarifying what that end is. Because when you start to synergize between different teams, maybe the end is not the same one that you had in mind, but it's a better one. It's that situation where 1 + 1 starts to equal 3 or 10 or 100 because you brought some good things together, and the result was actually more than the sum of its parts. However, it works in reverse. The negatives can also synergize. I mean, to start with a simple example, you have many systems in your network, and one system has a small vulnerability, the other system has another one, and you know the scenario. Multiple small vulnerabilities can combine to make a very exploitable situation. Same with leadership. You might inconvenience a little bit the marketing team. You might make a little bit of enemy with the sales team. You might be a little bit not liked by the development team. But when all those very small unpleasantness combine, then you have actually a situation where the entire company is against you. So you have to work to build the synergies with each of those teams. You have to build towards a positive outcome. And finally, we have the 7th habit, which is a bit of all-encompassing habit, which is about how do we bring it all together and how do we keep improving ourselves. And the name of the habit comes from a story that Covey gives in the book. So you are walking into the woods, you come across somebody who is cutting a tree, and that person is hard at work, and you ask him, "So how long have you been at it?" "Oh, I'm cutting this tree for 6 hours, and I'm so tired, and there's still so much to do." And how about you sharpen the saw? Take a break, sharpen the saw, and that might make things go faster. No, I don't have time for that. And it's related to a story that, a true story that Covey tells about his father. He was complaining to his father that, "Oh, I'm so tired. I don't have any time to work on myself. Everything is urgent." And his father asks him, Are you ever so busy driving that you don't have time to stop for gas? How does that end? Because that's exactly why we have in our security industry such a big problem with burnout. Because we never stop for gas. We never stop to work on ourselves. We don't take time to sharpen the saw. And yeah, I know it sounds, again, very theoretical and very new age, but there are 4 dimensions of renewal. This is how Covey calls them. And it's about the principle of working on your body, working on your heart, working on your mind, and working on your spirit. And working on your body is quite obvious. Exercising, be careful what you eat, be careful how much we drink. And for me, for example, I started a few years ago to run, and running is my me time. Running is actually when I thought and I started to develop this presentation. It was created in my mind long before I put anything in a slide, because I was taking that time. I was running for an hour or 2, and yeah, that was my thinking time. And it's different for everybody. You have to find your own. Same with spirit. I mean, yes, Covey was a very religious guy, and you can see that in the book. I'm a heathen atheist. But I still resonated with the book. And what spirituality means for me is very different from what spirituality means for Covey. And each of you will have a different definition, and that's fine. You need to find what is your definition of spirituality, what things enlighten you spirituality. And also things like volunteering. I mean, think about all the volunteers that are running this conference and helping. They're not doing it for a material purpose. They're here to do something more. Find your own definition, but keep working on them. Because if we don't take that time to sharpen the soul, yeah, there's a big burnout sign at the end of our not very distant future. And if we only focus on the immediate, on urgent, and we don't take time to improve, to work on those habits, we're not really going to progress that far. And you see the acronym there, EBAs, and probably some of you was wondering, what the hell is an EBA? It's another nice term that Covey came with. It's called emotional bank account. And every time you have a successful relation with somebody else, you're making a deposit in that emotional bank account. And it works in your family, in your circle of friends, and in your companies. Every time you work on having a successful win-win situation with another department, with another colleague, you're making an emotional bank account deposit, and you can rely on that deposit when you need it. So keep working on yourself, because it's very important. So hopefully in time, these are again the 7 habits. Be proactive, begin with the end in mind, put first things first, think win-win, seek first to understand, then to be understood, synergize, sharpen the saw, and then do it all over again. Because the benefits that you get from working on all those habits are much bigger than the sum of all the benefits individually. So, I'm Sebastian Avarvarei, and again, security is here to help. Thank you.
Very much, Sebastian. And you was right in time. Any questions? Yes, I can see a couple of them.
Hey, thank you for the presentation. I would like to ask for your opinion. Which of the 7 habits do you consider to be like the most effective, or let's say if done right, could have or deliver the most impact in a company or in security?
The one that you can start working on tomorrow.
Okay.
Pick one. Again, it's important to work on all of them. But in the spirit of the first one, the proactiveness, you have to start somewhere. And I can make arguments for each of them, why are they important for you or for a security leader in general. But talking theoretically about habits is not creating a habit. Habit is something that we intentionally develop, something that we put in practice. So pick one, see the one that resonates. I recommend starting with proactiveness, but that's just me. Pick the one that resonates with you, that you think you can actually start working on, and go from there.
Thank you.
A question here. You told us about empathic talking with other people from our teams. But in this empathy implies some vulnerability. And we are taught in the cybersecurity industry that the vulnerability in a system is not good. How do you manage to develop this kind of vulnerability in a team?
Sorry, I'm not sure I understood the question. Can you run it by me again?
How do you manage to develop, to let other people be vulnerable in a cybersecurity team when the vulnerability notion is not that good?
So how do I grow a team?
Yeah.
By getting, first of all, by making sure that what I hire in the team are people that I can work with. So that's why you have a lot of frameworks in hiring that help you to identify are the candidates the right ones for the, not in general, but for the type of position that you have open. Are they suitable? And not from a technical point of view, but from a mindset point of view. And then you have frameworks like Kate Blanchard's Situations Leadership, where you get used to and you learn how to work with people that are on different stages of their career. People who need very directive, you have to tell them step by step what they need to do, and people who are basically your right hand. And you have to work on understanding. So it starts with, if you remember, with seeking first to understand. You are looking, what are their strengths, what are the improvement points, and you work with them on those areas. And where they have strengths, you get out of the way, but you have to have that understanding of your team. You need to know where there are the vulnerabilities and the strong points. Does this answer the question? Or?
Yep.
Okay,
thanks.
Thank you.
There is one question in the back, Andrei.
And by the way, afterwards, just look for the red vest in the networking area. You can find me there.
I've got more here. Can I?
Yes, please.
Yeah, please.
Go for it. Oh, thank you. So I've got a more theoretical question. What if you got a problem for the circle of concern that is that big that could crash the circle of interest, the circle of influence? Sorry.
Sorry, I didn't quite hear it.
So we've got a problem in the circle of concern that it's that big that could crash the circle of influence.
So the circle of concern is where we can make a difference. And you need to be able to identify that first. Of course, you need to know what is your circle of influence. That's the first step. But then, by putting the actions there, if that was your question, those improvements that you make are going to be noticed. And the sphere of things that you can influence will keep growing. I don't know if that answers your question. Or?
And I was asking that we've got a problem that we couldn't solve, but it will affect us that it will reduce the circle of influence that we have. Like the things we can do, it will affect the things we can do. We could do less.
So a problem that you cannot solve, okay, it's, at least you tried, but sometimes just the process of trying to solve it and reaching that understanding that, okay, now we know why the problem cannot be solved, it's still something that will improve your circle of influence, because the process that you went through, we tried, we identified, instead of making an assumption at the beginning that this cannot be done, which is a circle of concern kind of thinking, you took the steps, you tried, and at least you gain some knowledge that you can then apply. Okay, we'll redefine the problem, we'll try in a different way, but it's still in the sphere of what we can influence. You can make a plan, you can make a proposal. Right, next time, let's approach the problem in a different way. Let's redefine the problem that we're trying to solve.
Thank you.
Okay, may I have the last one? The last question, may I address it to you? There is another one here, sorry.
Hi, thank you very much for the presentation. Out of the 7 habits, which one should the new hire have most?
The ones that you need for the role that they need to fulfill. There's no single one. I mean, if you're hiring somebody on a junior role, yeah, you're looking for somebody who has a good initiative, but somebody who is willing to understand more and listen first before starting to make changes. If you're hiring for a management, for a senior position, you want somebody who is a bit more outgoing, somebody who knows how to begin with the end in mind, how to make a plan. But again, if you start with what is the candidate, that's the second part of the equation. The first question you need to ask is, for this role, and I need to define very specific what this role is about, what are the things that are important? And again, not something you need to do by yourself. If you're in a company, talk with your HR department. They would have tools to help you. How do you draft a job description? How you describe and identify the qualities, not just technical ones, that are needed for somebody to be successful in that role? Thank you.
May I have the last one, Sebastian?
Please.
Which are your 3 things for which you'd like to be remembered of? It is a very tough question.
She needs to get a few more hands for it. That's a very good question. And by the way, when somebody tells, this is a very good question, they are buying time because they have no idea what the answer should be.
1 or 2 or...
No, I would like to be remembered for really synergizing the business and the technical mindset. I would like to be reminded for inspiring people. And I'd like to be reminded for getting things done.
Excellent. The second one, I guess you did it for today. And thank you very much for the presentation.